Hello folks, and welcome to the channel, or welcome back. And this is going to be another old rusty video. In the previous video we assembled the cylinder head onto the motor block, and we installed the carter pan on the bottom and all the associated seals. We also started cleaning up a lot of the rockers and the rocker shaft, and in this video we're going to install the rocker shaft and the rockers and the pedestal for the rockers, and then we'll adjust the valves. So this is going to be a little bit of work, although the video by itself may not be that long. Now the rocker shaft is fitted on top of the cylinder head, and for that one we have these pedestals where the shaft is going through, like so. And then the actual rockers are sitting on the shaft and the pivot, and they have been pushed up by the push rods that we have here in the back. Now, before we start installing all this, there's a few things we did double check before. If you look on this old shaft here, you can see that it's pretty worn out. You know, in many of the areas you can really feel that it is really worn and damaged. So therefore I've got myself a new shaft, and this is the new shaft. Right? So the one on the bottom is the new one, the one on the top is the old one. And you can see how nice that is. So we're going to fit the new shaft. Now before I'm going to fit the new shaft, there's a couple of things we want to double check. And let me show you that in a bit more detail what I'm referring to. This is a tumbler, and it has to be oiled. So in other words, oil has to get in between the shaft and the rocker or the tumbler, and that's why you have this little hole there, and the bigger hole at the end here is actually feeding oil throughout the whole tube, the whole shaft, and oil will spray out of all these little holes here, and that's how it's going to grease or oil all the tumblers. So it is very important that this is really clean and good, and that's why I'm going to check this shaft, although it's new, that there is no blockage. And to get the oil into the shaft through this hole, we need to get an oil channel coming up through the block, and it's the last support that actually has that hole. You see that hole right there? That is the actual oil channel which is going to feed into this hole. It goes through the stud or this stand, and then it goes inside there, and the hole on the shaft, which is this one, needs to line up, and this is how we can actually feed the system. So I want to make sure that all that is clear and free. So let's start with checking the new shaft, and then we'll do a couple more checks on this little hole right here, and then we're going to clean out all the thread where the bolts go on to support these studs or this foot where the shaft is fitted in. So now let's check if the new shaft is not having any blockages. So I should see liquid coming out of all these little holes. I'm going to spray some oil into the shaft itself through the feed hole, and then I'm going to use my compressor or compressed air to blow through, and we should see liquid coming out of all these little holes here. So let me do that first. You can already see it coming through. Hopefully I have enough liquid in it. So let's see what that gives us, right? And you can see it blowing, and I'm sure that the back end will blow as well, but in order to do so I need to fill it up with a bit more oil. So let me do that. So I filled up the tube with more liquid, and now let's put compressed air through it and see if all the little holes are blowing. And they are. So everything is free, that's good. So let us have a check first if this oil channel is free. Now the oil channel goes through the block, the cylinder head, and it comes out on the side here. That's where it comes out, and that's where you normally have this oil pipe attached to, and I think it's attached like this, and then it's fed from below from the oil pump. Now I'm not going to hook this up for the moment, but I'm going to spray some liquid in it, and then I'm going to blow it through, and we should see it popping out on the top. See? There we go. So that's good. And of course we can blow it out with some compressed air. Hopefully it's not going to spoil the lens. We're going to check out all the threaded holes where the studs or the foot are mounted on are free and not clogged up. And for that one, I'm going to use a standard tap that I'm just going to turn in, and then we'll see how clean that is. But they should be fairly clean because I got all this clean before. But it's always good to do this kind of effort. So I'm going to do all these holes, and then we continue with the preparation work to install this shaft. I'm finished with clearing the thread for the studs or the foot or the pedestals for the shaft. Now, some of you might think that I'm going a little bit ballistic on checking out these new rods. But I've had bad experiences in the past where one of those rods was actually clogged up. There was a little piece left inside and it didn't grease my tumblers or my rockers, and I had an issue afterwards. So now I'd rather be safe than sorry and double check all this. It's a small effort and it really is going to help you out. The next thing we're going to do is to make sure that all these foot or the pedestals are actually clean on the bottom. Although we cleaned them up already in the ultrasonic cleaner, but sometimes you may have residues from seals or joints, and like in this case. So let us take that off and then we continue. And on this specific pedestal or foot, we still have a bit of seal left. And the easiest way is to take it off just with a razor blade. That typically goes off very smoothly. And no matter how simple things are sometimes to disassemble and reassemble, I always mark my pieces where they were on the engine. It's a habit I have, and it really has helped me. And in fact, it's good to do that because you avoid additional wear and tear if you were to change them between them. Right, so now let's carry on with those foot or studs or whatever you want to call them, or pedestals. And we're going to clean out actually the inside a bit because that is something I like to clean as well. And cleaning the inside isn't all that difficult. Just get a suitable copper brush, stick it in, put it on your drill, and then, just put it through and let it run, and it will clean up. Now, this is not critical because the shaft inside is not going to rotate. In fact, it will be squeezed together or pinched into place because of that opening once you start locking down this bolt here. But there is going to be a spacer there. All right, so let's do that. And I think that already looks more than good enough. I don't need to do much more on that. So I'm going to place all these pedestals into place now, but not permanently. I just want to have them in the right spot, and they are numbered 1, 2, 3, and 4, and so on. And then we're going to have a look on how we need to fit all the different washers and parts and springs onto that shaft, because that's a bit of work. Now let's have a look on how we're going to assemble all these tumblers that I have over here in all these boxes, and they're all numbered from 1 to 8 with all the springs and all the little washers that come with it, on how we're going to fit this in the right sequence onto this rod. The way I'm going to do this is I'm going to do it off the engine block, and I'm going to install all the pedestals one by one, but filling it all up sequentially. So one pedestal, the washer, the tumbler or the rocker, a washer, a spring, a washer, a tumbler, a bigger spacer, a pedestal, and so on. So I want to make sure that this is done in the right sequence, and I've got lots of spare parts already. Here you have them all. I ordered all these parts new springs. I also got new spacers for that purpose, and small rings in between that fits in between the tumblers left and right. So I've got all this. So you need to do this in a proper sequence. Now, if you took your things apart without numbering all your parts, without knowing the exact sequence, without taking a picture or making a diagram, you will be in deep trouble unless you have a very good manual, which I do not have for this engine. So I have to rely on taking notes and memorizing things, and I'm not that good in memorizing anymore. Well, I never was, to be very honest, unless there is something I can get for free. Okay, just a joke, guys. And I have an old cylinder head here, which I picked up on my trip to France last year, and you might have seen that video. And with this one, that is my reference. So I'm going to look on this one on how I have to fit things together. So let's have a bit of a closer look so you can see on how we're going to do this. So if you start on the left, I'm going to move this tumbler over a bit. You can see here that we have a washer. Now that washer is exactly the washer that I have in my boxes. That's this one right here. So there's one on each side of the tumblers. If I move the spring back a bit here, you will see, if I can get it loose, another washer sitting here, right? See that? Then we got the spring. Then we have the washer again on this side of the tumbler. See that washer there? And if I move the tumbler furthermore, I have a bigger ring sitting right there. And the bigger rings I have also as new parts. So let me just pick that up. And here is that newer, bigger ring. So this is how we're going to install this. And I can go my way through. So this is just a repetition of everything, except in the middle. And in the middle, I have two additional bigger bushes. Let's see if I can move this tumbler over a bit. See that bush here? That's the one. So that's one. There's also no washer on this side, and there's no washer or a spacer on the other side. So that's something to remember. And it's the same thing on the other side. So we got this washer here. There's no spacer, no nothing. So just this big bush. So that's how we're going to reinstall everything. I've laid out all the parts in sequence on how they fit to the shaft, and this is the shaft. So now I'm going to put that on exactly that way. But there is one more question that people often ask is, where should this feed hole be? I can mount it like this, but I can also turn it around and like that. So now the feed hole is on the bottom, and now it's on the top. Now, I don't know, I couldn't find it in any manual, but logic tells me that if I'm looking on the tumbler itself, it has a hole there. If the tumbler goes on and it's passing that hole, it's going to leak out very quickly. So I'd rather have the holes in the bottom, like so, so then this hole cannot pick it up. So oil will actually flow in between the tumbler and the rod, and then excessive oil may come out on the sides or it may come out on the top. So that's a bit on how I look at it. But I might be wrong, but that's the way I'm going to do this. So putting the shaft into the stands is not all that hard. However, you need to force them open a bit because otherwise you can't get it in. So what I'm using is a big screwdriver. I place it in there, oops, and I'm going to give it a few knocks so it just opens up gently. Not too much because you don't want to force things, and then it slides in pretty easily. Did you see that? See, now it's kind of stuck, but if you actually open that up, you can get it in. So I'm going to place it right in its spot. There we go. And I think it's about equal. There we go. That's number one. And this is how we're going to mount the whole sequence. Notice the little arrow I put up. This is meaning pointing downwards, and that matches up with actually the holes that I have here on the side because I wanted to point them downwards as I just explained a few seconds ago. So now I'm going to start sliding on all the different pieces. First thing that needs to go on is a washer. So let's slide the washer on. That's it. Next is a tumbler for cylinder number 1. Next is a washer. There we go. Next is a spring. So if you work your way down the row the way you laid it out, then nothing can go wrong. Another washer. A tumbler, which is now number 2. And you can actually see that because they should be both pointing inwards a bit. And then another washer. And now I can already put up the spacer. There we go. The big spacer. And now we install the second support or stand or foot, whatever you want to call those. And let's see. And again, we'll have to knock it open a bit and then we can install it. I want to be careful with this because you don't want to break this. Now in my case, I don't have much of an issue because I have a spare one. And here is that support. There we go. Now how far away they should be from each other is something you can actually measure on the box. So let's measure that so we have it more or less correct. So that's about 7.5 millimeters. So what I have here is about right. For the last support, you want to make sure that the rod is absolutely vertical with this oil channel here. So I'm going to turn that a bit by holding the rest down on the flat surface. And let's do that a bit more. And that way, things should be all right. Now, you may see that others will turn, so you may have to push that a bit back and forth. But you need to have that absolutely vertical so it lines up with the hole inside. So let's see how far that is. And I can check that and see. So if I'm going to place it flush, so what I can see is that if I place it flush, then I'm going to have exactly that feed hole in the right position. So that's good. So let me open up this guy as well, just like the others, and then we will fit it on. And I'm going to use a small tube just to see if it feeds in properly. And that goes all the way in like this, so that's good. I don't feel no obstruction, so I'm happy with that. And now that I know where it's supposed to be, I'm going to mark this. Well, we're going to install now the rocker shaft, and for that one I have to place some seals, and don't forget that the paper seals with the center hole has to go where the oil feed is, and then the others are just ordinary paper seals with or without the center hole. It doesn't really matter. These all happen to be central hole. I don't know why that is, and they change a bit in different colors, but they're all the same thickness. And then we're going to start to oil all these things a bit, right? You want to have all these seals oiled. So now comes the greasy job. I'm also going to oil all the valves. Alright, just turn it over, put some grease on it, or grease, turn it over, turn them over and put a bit of oil on it. I don't want to fill up the holes where the studs go in, because wouldn't be good if you have too much oil in there, so be careful with that. Alright. So let's get this and just let it settle on it. And you might want to play a bit with the valves, lift the rockers a bit, or the tumblers, because they have to fall into the pockets of the push rods. Now, of course, some of the valves may be pushed open, right? So that's something we need to keep in mind. Now let's see if we can now put the bolts in and see how that's going to work. So now that we have this almost in place, what we can see is that it's actually floating around on the push rods, and the push rods are here in the back, and the push rod is pushing against this valve, you know, and I can't get it deeper because it wants to open up the valve, and I don't want to open up the valves right now, so I have to undo all the counter nuts here and then release all this. Before I'm going to unlock the counter nuts, I'm just going to put some bolts in so I can hold the thing a little bit together, right? So, and then let's oil everything. And it can start to soak. So let's undo these counter nuts, and then we can adjust the clearance wide open. Here we go. And now I can just turn this all the way up so we get lots of play. And I'm going to do this for every single one of them. Well, some of them can really be stuck. All right. And turn it all the way up. Now that we released all the tumblers from any possible tension because of the push rods pushing them down, it's time to check that each of these tumblers is hitting the valve stem right on the top. That is very important, and if that is not correct, then you have to put additional washers in between the rockers or tumblers. And I think this is looking quite all right in my case. I already placed a couple of bolts on the sockets or the foot or whatever you want to call them, and now it's time to bolt it all down. So I'm going to bolt those down to a torque of 1 kilogram meter. That's what the book specifies, or at least the documentation I found. But we're going to fit, of course, some locking plates on the top. So let's start with that. So let's undo the bolt. I made sure that all the paper washers were in the right place, so now I can actually turn that in and lock it into place. Now this is a special one because the valve cover will have to sit through this hole. Alright, so let's put that in. And this is how we're going to do this for every single one of those. So I'm not going to spend your time on this, guys, but you see the idea. And these are actually locking plates, and once we have them all in place, we'll bend them over. Now before we go into bolt down everything, we need to put these shims in between. And they go in like this. And we need to do this for each single one of them. Now you got to watch out that you don't drop them inside, because then you really have a problem. So that is always a bit tricky. So you got to be very careful when you do this, because otherwise you can open up the motor again or try to get it out with a magnet or something like this. It has happened to me before. So now I'm going to start to bolt everything down, but not very tight. And at the end we'll bring it to torque, and this is about 1 kilogram. I just want to make sure right now that everything is free, and you want to check that the push rods are not caught. See, this one is almost caught already, and that's my mistake. So I need to open that up a bit again so I can release this one. So you want to make sure that they don't get caught. That would not be good. Okay, that's better. And these studs are a bit different because I can't really lock them in place, so that's why I'm going to use the nut from the other one, tie it together. You see why I'm holding my hand like this, so if it falls, it doesn't fall in the engine block. All right. And release that. Alright, so once I'm done with this, we're going to put them all to torque, and then we'll adjust the valves. So we're about ready to start torquing everything down now, and we're going to torque it down to about 1 kilogram. So this one is a lot. Alright. Okay. And these will be Fingerspitzengefühl, as they say it in German. It is important that the shaft doesn't rotate, because otherwise the oil channel will have a problem. So you've got to make sure that that stays absolutely in place. And can we fit this guy? Yeah, we can. So I have them all in now. So if I rotate, you start seeing pushing. And everything is still freely running. So what we're going to do now is to double check that the oil channel throughout the rod is well installed and good. And therefore I'm going to fill up the whole oil channel with oil. And then I'm going to put some compressed air through it and see if that is working. All right, so let's see. Maybe I got covered under oil, who knows? Let's see how all the oil is coming out in all the different areas. And that's what I wanted to see. All right. So now that we have everything in place, we can go ahead and adjust the valves. Now, one of the issues with this engine is that I have no timing marks. There are none. Maybe there's some on the flywheel, but we haven't mounted the flywheel yet. But still, it doesn't really matter. It doesn't matter what the timing is. It doesn't matter what the firing order is at this moment in time. What is important is that you can look on the valves and know which valves are what. So if you know that this is an exhaust valve and this is an intake valve, and you know it for all the other valves, then you just need to rotate the pulley or the crankshaft in the normal rotating direction and keep your eye on these valves. So we know this is a 4-stroke engine, right? So the piston is going up and down twice basically. So it's going to come down, which is your intake. So then the intake valve has to be open. It's going to come back up. It's going to cause compression. Both valves should be closed. Once it's the top dead center at the compression stroke, you're going to have ignition. Piston is going to fly down. Valves need to stay closed. When the piston is at bottom dead center, it's going to come back up and it needs to evacuate the gases inside the cylinder. So then the exhaust valve will have to open up. Piston comes back up, top dead center, then the exhaust valve closes, and again the piston is going to go down again, and then the intake valve should go open. So if you know that sequence, all you need to do is to have a look, close look on these valves, and this is how I'm going to do that. Now, how do you know if you are top dead center? Because both valves will be closed. Well, for that I'm using always a screwdriver, and I'm sticking it into the spark plug hole, and I feel where the piston is, and I can feel it going up or going down, and I find that way top dead center. Once I have that, I use my pen and I put a marker here on the pulley. I've done that, and you might not see it, but that's what I've done. And then I'm just going to go along to the next cylinder. Now, if you know the firing order, then you know which cylinder to look at next. But I don't really care about that too much. I just rotate and I'll see. Now, typically you have a 1, 3, 2 and 4, or a 1, 3, 4 and 2 firing order. So this is how I do it. So no magic. You don't need fancy timing marks at this moment in time to adjust the valve clearance. Ignition is a different story. Anyway, so let's get on and let's start to adjust the valves on the procedure I just explained. So now it's time to adjust the valve clearance, and the first valve on cylinder number 1 is the intake valve, and the second one is the exhaust valve. And the way we're going to do this is by rotating the crankshaft. Now, I have no marks anywhere on this engine, so it's going to be a bit searching to find out the right moment in time when we are at top dead center, and therefore I'm going to use a screwdriver through the spark plug hole to find out when the piston is at top dead center, and at the same time we're going to keep an eye on the position of those two valves here, because we know what they will be doing. It's a 4-stroke engine. So we have intake, we have compression, we got labor, and we have exhaust. So the valves have to open up at the right stroke. So let's start doing that. So I'm going to keep the camera on the two valves. I'm just rotating the crankshaft now. Let's see what happens. So what I see that this guy is already coming up. So that means the intake valve is going to open up. So the piston is now going down and it's sucking in air. Right. So let's continue. Now the intake stroke is done because the valve is now closing. Now I expect actually a compression stroke, right? Because that's what typically would follow. So let's rotate. I don't see nothing happening here anymore. Everything is loose. So I suspect, now let me feel in the back with the screwdriver through the spark plug hole where the piston is. And I can start to feel the piston a bit. So piston is now coming up. And it feels like it's top dead center right now. So I know now that cylinder number 1 is at its compression stroke, so ignition time, and now I should adjust these valves to the proper clearance. I can adjust both of them, that is not an issue. To adjust the valves, you need a feeler gauge, and this is a 0.25 millimeter. I'm going to put it between the top of the stem of the valve and the tumbler, and now I'm going to turn on the screw until that's kind of locked. Yeah, that feels about right. And then I'm going to lock that nut, which is the counter nut that prevents it. It was way up, so let's check it. Yeah. Now typically what you will see is that once you tighten that nut, your clearances go off a bit. So I tend to give it a bit more and then lock it. Okay. That's good. All right, so let's adjust that. And that really is all what there is to it. So the first one is adjusted, so now we can adjust the next cylinder. But what is the next cylinder? And the next cylinder is the one which is the next one in the firing order. Since I don't know exactly what the firing order is, I could just watch the valves and see what happens. I do suspect that cylinder number 3 will be the next one, because that would make logical sense. Or maybe cylinder number 4, but that would be a bit uncommon. So we're going to have a closer look now on the valves of cylinder number 3. And this is cylinder number 3. I don't know what state it is in. This feels like a bit more close. So this is actually an intake valve. This is an exhaust valve. So let's rotate the engine and see what happens and identify where we are. All right, let's keep an eye on these valves. I don't see much happening here. Uh-oh, now I see movement. I see this valve going down. That's exhaust. And now the piston should be coming up actually. And now piston is going down. I expect this valve now to open up because that would be the intake, right? Yeah, there we go. Now we got intake. And when this valve closes, we'll start at the compression stroke. So now this intake valve is closed, the exhaust valve is as good as closed, so now we have compression. Now let me check where the piston is right now. Oh, it's way down, I don't feel anything yet. So I need to rotate, so piston is coming up now. And I start to feel it. Let's see when we have top dead center. Yeah, that's about it, I think. So again, we do the same story. We put the gauge up, off, which is now 0.2 mil, until it's a bit tight, but still movable. And then we lock it. All right, that should be it, I think. Yeah, that feels good. And with the 0.25, we are going to do the exhaust valve exactly the same way. Put the feeler up, tighten down, not too tight, and then lock the counter nut. Okay, so now we can do the next cylinder, right? So we got cylinder 1, 3, either it's 2 or 4. So let's have a look on cylinder number 2 now. So we're going to keep an eye on cylinder number 4 and see what this guy is doing, and then we can adjust it. So again, I'm going to rotate the crankshaft and see what the valves are doing. Now it looks like I have an intake valve, an exhaust valve which is opening up, so that means piston is going up. I already have given a bit of a white tick here, so I know more or less where it's supposed to be. Let's see. Not yet, almost. And now I can feel the piston. Yep, that's about top dead center now, so that's good. I can give it a little bit more. And let's see. And I already have a mark for cylinder number 1 because I did that in between, guys, so this is kind of my reference. Okay, so it's good. So now I can adjust these 2 valves and then we should be all set. And actually then all valves are adjusted. So folks, we've come to the end of this video and I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. We did quite a bit of work. We installed the rocker shaft and then we adjusted the valves. So the engine block is now near to its end. We still have to put the exhaust manifolds, intake manifolds and a lot of auxiliary kit on it. And once we're done with that, we'll put it on the bench and test it out. The next videos will be all about the intake manifolds, the carburetor, the distributor, the water pump and so on. And right now I got to go because I have to pick up my next project, and maybe, just maybe, I give you a glimpse. Thank you for watching and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.